just so I've chosen about two or three of them to read to you this morning. And these pertain to Mary Oliver's dog, Percy. They're about Percy, and as one of the poems says, also not about Percy. Percy wakes me. Percy wakes me, and I am not ready. Now he's eager for action. A walk, then breakfast. He is sitting on the kitchen counter where he is not supposed to be. How wonderful you are, I say. How clever if you needed me to wake up. He thought he would hear a lecture, and deeply his eyes began to shine. He tumbles onto the couch for more compliments. He squirms and squeals. He has done something that he needed, and now he hears that it's okay. I scratch his ears, I turn him over and touch him everywhere. He is wild with the okayness of it. Then we walk, then he has breakfast, and he is happy. This is a poem about Percy. This is a poem about more than Percy. Think about it. Percy and books. Percy does not like it when I read a book. He puts his face over the top of it and moans. He rolls up his eyes. Sometimes he sneezes. The sun is up, he says, and the wind is down. The tide is out, and the neighbors' dogs are playing. But Percy, I say, ideas! The elegance of language, the insights, the funniness, the beautiful stories that rise and fall and turn into strength or courage. Books? Says Percy. I ate one once, and it was not enough. Let's go. So today's sermon title is The Herding Dog's Guide to a Well-Behaved Human. I'll give you a little context as to its genesis, but I wanted to start with 3 steps that I've come up with, really, that Foxy's taught me about. Step 1, patience. Step 2, rest. Step 3, relationship. The patience, I hope it's either implicit from the sermon or we'll get to it later. Step 2 on rest, sometimes we need time away from each other. And then step 3, relationship, so we can come back into relationship. And along with relationship, and this is where the bulk, I think, of today's work will be together, it's communication and a returning. I spoke about earlier in the Time for All Ages a little bit about how I perceive Foxy to communicate with me. I also did not mention, I left out of well, it is for all ages, but I left out the side eye that Foxy gives me and what she's communicating with. And then a returning. She keeps coming back to me, and I keep coming back to her. The sermon title came as a riff on a book called The Guide to a Well-Behaved Dog. Yet very early on in my relationship with Foxy, we were both in isolation together, and as I am continually reminded in relationship with others, she is a well-behaved dog. I am the one who needs teaching about her perspective. Canine ethologist and animal behavioralist Dr. Patricia O'Connell talks about human primate, I say we as the human we, I'm sorry to leave out the other species in that way. Communicate with large hand gestures and lots of vocalizations. Dog communication, to many of us, is not intuitive. What McConnell has taught me, through her careful observations, is that dogs generally communicate or respond to communication that has to do with small visual gestures. So with Foxy, I found that when I tell her to sit aloud, she doesn't do it as consistently. But when I give a hand gesture that I learned from a trainer, and I am consistent with that gesture, she generally responds, unless she really wants to go see a squirrel, because that is way more interesting than her sitting in that moment. Foxy is an Aussie, an Australian Shepherd, and I hear that those dogs are fairly smart. And I found that I am often confusing Foxy with my unclear commands, with my unclear communication. I'm inconsistent, I'm loud, I say way too many words, it flows into other areas. Her preferred language, as I said, is visual. She understands visual commands far better than auditory ones. And by commands, I wish I could change that to communication. And I'm hoping that that's what we're doing. But I don't want to lie to myself in the process. I call her my dog companion, and I'm her human companion. But there's still very much a hierarchy that I want to name, that I'm still working through. And it's not that she doesn't want to please when she veers off to see the squirrel, but innately she knows how she learns best through these visual communications. I want to ask you a couple questions. First, how do you learn best? And I know it depends on context and the situation. How do you know that you know something, that you're learning something? In today's story, we learned something else about Foxy, that she loves affection and connection. My two follow-up questions to the learning and the knowing and the ways of knowing. So what do you value? What do you love? Dr. Takia Amin, a scholar, educator, and movement leader in Black Lives of UU, wrote an essay for the Unitarian Universalist Pocket Guide entitled Bringing My Own Self, and I'd like to share an excerpt of it with you. What I know is that in Unitarian Universalism, we are better because of who we are together, and at our best when we hold the complexity that community provides as a reminder of the holy. It is for these reasons that I do not hold back, hide myself, or shrink as a member of this broadly diverse faith community, and I encourage others to do the same. I don't want any of us to miss out on the beauty that each of us brings to this space. We take it as a given in this tradition that yes, we are all different in our experiences of the holy. And because of that, we have the blessing of learning from each other as we wrestle with the tension of how to live in full, equitable, and right relationship with each other. This faith has made me better, and I hope that at my best, I have enriched this tradition too. I believe our faith is made better by everyone who chooses to embrace its challenges and invitations, contradictions, and possibilities. Last fall, I was invited to give feedback on a draft of Article 2. For those who are learning along with me and maybe are either relatively new to the faith tradition or if you were disconnected for a little bit, that part of the process, or new to this completely, Article 2, as I understand it, serves as a further way into framing not seemingly discrete principles to live by, as its previous iteration, but values we live into, deepening in relationship with our covenantal faith, the promises we make to one another to be in community and in relationship together. Values, as they are being named and brought forth for either agreement or disagreement, or we're voting on it, I think, in about a year and a half, right? Values of justice, interdependence, equity, generosity, pluralist, transformation, all centered around love. One part in particular, a clause, I have legal training, so I can't help it. One part in particular, there was a clause on the inspirations that really got me going earlier this week. The earlier version that I was privy to said this. It was a draft from October. As Unitarian Universalists, we draw upon and are inspired by the full depth and breadth of sacred understandings as experienced by humanity. Grateful for the religious lineages we inherit and the pluralism which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. This week, I learned of a proposed revision after much conversation and meetings this fall with many folks all around the world. Now, the proposed revision reads as follows. It's a little bit longer, bear with me. But as Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired by sacred and secular understandings that help us to live into our values. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which they were created and are currently practiced. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. Grateful for the religious ancestries we inherit and the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. Sometimes, when we feel like we haven't been heard for so long, it's easy to go into a mode of reactivity. I speak from myself. It can, in fact, be a trauma response. Earlier this week, I was in a class where we were studying the new proposed changes to Article 2 that I just read to you. And I could not understand why, in the new version under sources, it was updated to include the word secular. I thought the sacred was enough. I thought the piece was implicitly secular. Maybe I was and am missing the signals. When some say that a Mary Oliver poem, like the ones we read earlier today, is secular, they might have had very good reasons to call it so. Just as good a reason as to why I believe that for me, in my context, those poems are sacred texts. And as some of my classmates put it, many in our generations, especially following the pandemic, are hungry for the sacred. Dr. Sean Wilson, an Indigenous scholar and researcher, in his book, Research is Ceremony, teaches us another form of research methodologies based on Indigenous practices. Teaching readers, or not even teaching, being in community with Indigenous readers who know that everything is sacred. And what I see in the later sentences of Article 2 revised, is that some deep attention was given to context. They were important nods and moves for deepening in there too. And I didn't see it, I'll tell you honestly. I didn't see it because I was so stuck on the word secular. I was so angry at what I felt was a dilution of the sacred. And if I had just read a little bit further, I could have seen that there was space for the sacred there too. On its face, the sermon title and blurb might look purely secular, depending on your definition of both. Yet for me, who believes in the sacrality of all we do and are, it is sacred. And how do we get there? In relationship. Foxy permits me to rest, to give affection, to get up, to eat, to find joy in a walk, and even in picking up poop. Because it's in service of her, of each of us in a relationship. She helps me bridge the divide between the ordinary and the divine. She reminds me that I too am a creature of and in community, and that I cannot do any of this work alone. She reminds me to not automatically assume the worst of others, but the best. Foxy is relational theory made real, a canine embodiment of the sacred, a blessing of existence. My relationship with Foxy is an example of this, and so is my relationship with the people of the First Parish People of Color Caucus. They've taught me to come back and be here and present in community. Because being in community is hard, and yet isolation is not an antidote. Through clear communication, we can live our values into existence with one another.